Every time you see a fire exit sign, a building code, or a rule about how close houses can be built, you are seeing the ghost of the Roman Empire. Because the reason modern cities have fire regulations at all begins here, in London, over 1,000 years after the Romans left. In the year 1600, London was still built on Roman bones. Its walls, its streets, even its mistakes. And the fires that nearly destroyed this city would quietly shape the rules that govern where you live today. To understand modern safety, we have to walk through a city that was never safe at all. Fire has always been one of humanity's greatest paradoxes. It warms us, feeds us, lights our cities, and fuels progress. Yet, when it escapes control, it becomes merciless. Entire neighborhoods can vanish in hours, cultures can be erased in a single night, and lives can be lost before anyone fully understands what is happening. Long before modern alarms, professional fire brigades, or building regulations existed, cities lived with the constant fear that a single spark could end everything. What most people do not realize is that the fire safety laws we now take for granted were not born from careful planning or enlightened foresight. They were written in ashes. Every emergency exit, every fire-resistant wall, every evacuation drill exists because somewhere in history, people died without them. The modern world is protected not by luck, but by memory. If you enjoy long-form historical documentaries that reveal how tragedy quietly shaped the world we live in today, this is one of those stories that deserve to be followed to the very end. And if you would like to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as the video continues. It helps this channel keep uncovering the hidden histories behind everyday life. For most of human history, fire was simply an accepted risk of urban living. Cities were dense, chaotic, and almost entirely combustible. Homes were built from timber, roofs were thatched, and streets were so narrow that neighbors could reach out and touch each other's windows. Open flames were everywhere. Candles lit homes, hearths warmed families, and workshops burned day and night. In such conditions, fires were not rare disasters. They were inevitable. Ancient Rome offers one of the earliest and clearest examples of how dangerous urban fire could be. The city was filled with tall apartment buildings known as insulae, constructed quickly and cheaply to house a growing population. These structures were overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and often built with flammable materials. Fires spread rapidly from one floor to the next, leaping across streets and consuming entire districts. In the year 64 AD, a massive fire broke out and burned for several days. Large sections of Rome were destroyed. Although historians still debate who was responsible, what matters more is what followed. Roman authorities were forced to accept that rebuilding the city exactly as it had been would only guarantee future disasters. After the devastating fire that swept through Rome in 64 AD, Emperor Nero launched large-scale aid initiatives, introduced sweeping changes to the city's layout, and constructed the lavish Domus Aurea, or Golden House. Despite these actions, he was widely suspected of having caused the blaze himself and attempted to shift public outrage by targeting Christians as scapegoats. New regulations emerged. Buildings were limited in height. Stone and brick were encouraged over wood. Streets were widened to act as fire breaks. These measures were not acts of architectural vision. They were early survival strategies. This idea, that the way a city is designed can determine whether its people live or die, would echo across centuries. By the Middle Ages, European cities had grown even more dangerous. London, Paris, and Amsterdam were tightly packed, their streets winding and narrow, the buildings leaning precariously over one another. Firefighting methods were primitive. Buckets of water, leather hoses, and desperate demolition attempts were the only defenses available. When fires started, entire communities often watched helplessly as flames consumed everything. This vulnerability reached its breaking point in London in 1666. At the time, the city was still largely medieval in structure. Most buildings were made of timber, and regulations were loosely enforced or ignored altogether. When a small fire began in a bakery on Pudding Lane, it appeared unremarkable at first. Fires were common. This one, however, was different. Driven by strong winds and fueled by dry wooden buildings, the flames spread rapidly. Over the course of 4 days, the fire destroyed more than 80% of London. 13,000 houses were reduced to rubble. Churches, markets, and public buildings collapsed into smoking ruins. St. Paul's Cathedral itself was lost. Hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless. Although the official death toll was low, the psychological impact was enormous. Londoners realized that their city, as it was built, was fundamentally unsafe. The disaster forced a radical shift in thinking. London could not simply be rebuilt. It had to be redesigned. New laws followed. Wooden facades were banned. Brick and stone became mandatory building materials. Streets were widened and standardized. Building heights were regulated. For the first time, fire was treated not as divine punishment or bad luck, but as a preventable threat that could be controlled through law. Many of the principles introduced after the Great Fire of London are still visible in modern cities today. If this moment in history sounds familiar, it is because much of our urban world was shaped here. And this is only the beginning. Another quiet revolution emerged from London's ashes: fire insurance. Property owners, suddenly aware of the financial devastation fire could cause, began to insure their buildings. Insurance companies, in turn, hired private fire brigades to protect insured properties. These brigades marked buildings with plaques to show which were covered. Over time, competition gave way to cooperation, and private brigades evolved into organized public fire services. The lesson was becoming clear. Fire could no longer be fought with prayer, panic, or buckets of water. It required planning, training, coordination, and accountability. As cities expanded and the Industrial Revolution transformed society, fire found new opportunities for destruction. Factories, warehouses, and workshops were filled with flammable materials, oils, chemicals, and fabrics. Entire districts were dedicated to industrial production, often located dangerously close to residential areas. In 1871, this new urban reality was exposed in dramatic fashion by the Great Chicago Fire. Chicago had grown rapidly, built largely from wood to keep costs low and construction fast. When a fire broke out, conditions were perfect for disaster. Strong winds carried embers across rooftops. Firefighting resources were overwhelmed. Within 2 days, over 17,000 buildings were destroyed and around 100,000 people were left homeless. Yet Chicago did not simply recover. It transformed. The city rebuilt itself with unprecedented ambition and discipline. Strict building codes were introduced. Fire-resistant materials became mandatory. Hydrants and water systems were expanded. Fire departments were professionalized and equipped with modern technology. Zoning laws separated industrial areas from residential neighborhoods. Chicago became a laboratory for modern urban safety. Architects, engineers, and lawmakers studied what had gone wrong and ensured it would not happen again. If you have ever wondered why cities enforce strict construction rules, why inspections exist, or why certain materials are banned, much of it traces directly back to Chicago's rebirth. But perhaps the most painful lessons of fire safety did not come from cities burning, but from people being trapped. In 1911, a fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York. The building was crowded with young garment workers, many of them immigrants. When the fire spread, workers rushed to escape, only to discover that exits were locked. Fire escapes failed. Panic spread. Some workers leapt from windows rather than burn. 146 people lost their lives. Public outrage was immediate and intense. Investigations revealed a culture where profit had been prioritized over safety. In response, sweeping legal reforms followed. Emergency exits became mandatory. Doors were required to open outward. Fire drills were introduced. Occupancy limits were enforced. Regular inspections became law. For the first time, fire safety was recognized as a basic right of workers. Many of the protections found in offices, factories, and public buildings today exist because of this single tragedy. Throughout the 20th century, fires in theaters, cinemas, nightclubs, and public venues exposed another deadly pattern: overcrowding. Locked exits, Poor signage and flammable interior materials turned small fires into mass casualties. Each disaster shocked the public, and each forced governments to act. Gradually, laws required illuminated exit signs, emergency lighting, clearly marked escape routes, and strict limits on capacity. Materials were tested for flammability. Staff training became compulsory. These changes did not come easily, but they saved countless lives. As buildings grew taller, fire safety faced new challenges. Traditional firefighting methods could not reach upper floors quickly enough. In response, new technologies emerged. Automatic sprinkler systems were developed. Stairwells were pressurized to keep smoke out. Buildings were divided into fire-resistant compartments to slow the spread of flames. Every major high-rise fire produced new data, new studies, and new regulations. Fire safety became a science, continuously evolving as architecture grew more complex. By the late 20th century, it was clear that fire did not respect borders. Knowledge had to be shared. International fire codes were developed, drawing lessons from disasters around the world. These standards continue to evolve, updated after every major incident. Modern technology reflects this long and painful history. Smoke detectors, fire alarms, flame-retardant materials, and computer-simulated evacuations exist because people once died without them. Innovation followed tragedy, not the other way around. If this story is changing the way you look at everyday buildings, that awareness is exactly why these histories matter. And if you value content that goes deeper than headlines, subscribing during the video ensures you will not miss future stories like this. Today, when we walk past an emergency exit sign or hear a fire alarm during a routine drill, it is easy to feel inconvenienced. Rarely do we think about why these systems exist, but each one is a silent memorial, a reminder of cities that burned, factories that trapped workers, and crowds that never made it out. Fire safety laws were not created out of fear alone. They were created out of memory. Memory of what happens when warnings are ignored and risks are dismissed. The great fires of history did more than destroy. They reshaped cities, transformed laws, and saved countless lives in the generations that followed. The flames took much, but they also forced humanity to learn. And every time a building empties safely, every time an alarm gives people the seconds they need to escape, those lessons continue to speak from the ashes.